Greetings gamers, I'm ShootKapow, and over the years there have been many busted and or dominant Pokemon in competitive singles Pokemon. You've got your Great Tusks, your T-Tars, your Excadrills, but perhaps the most famous and powerful of them all is the fearsome GSC Snorlax, who is listed on the Smogon strategy page as being the single most dominant Pokemon in any OU tier in history. Now we'll discuss its incredible influence over GSC OU here in a second, but Snorlax in the early gens was nothing to scoff at, even outside of the Johto games. However, over the years, it's fallen out of favor and out of standard play, and was least seen in Sword and Shield NU, far from its golden or silver throne that it held in Gen 2. We'll be starting at the very beginning though, as we take a walk through history and talk about the fall of Snorlax in competitive Pokemon. Now in this video, we'll be going over these competitive formats. Starting of course with OBY, where Snorlax sat alongside its fellow normal types, Chansey and Tauros, and was present on virtually every team. Running an RBY-OU team without these Pokemon is like signing up for a marathon the day after having both your legs amputated. First, let's look at what made the normal type so good in the first place. Only having one weakness, and that being to a virtually non-existent type, the only fighting types in the tier were Poliwrath, who didn't even always run Submission, and Machamp, who was just not worth running on pretty much any team, paired with Submission just being an awful move. Benefited the type quite well. It didn't have any resistances, and its immunity to Ghost didn't matter since the only Ghost type attack that did Ghost type damage, Lick, was abysmal. It was immune to Body Slam paralysis, which was a neat plus. However, it didn't even need that Ghost immunity when two of the S tier normal types had astounding bulk. Tauros was an incredibly powerful Pokemon, throwing off strong, fast attacks while having good recovery and rest. Chansey was an incredible special tank with matching offense, and Snorlax was the bulkiest mon around with the power to back it up, using Reflect to boost its physical resilience to crazy levels, Body Slam and moves like Ice Beam or Earthquake for coverage, Hyper Beam and Self-Destruct for huge damage, and Amnesia, a move that boosted your special stat, basically both your special attack and special defense, by 2 stages, letting it take huge hits and potentially sweep a team. It wasn't without its counters, obviously. Gengar World variants select Earthquake, Cloyster and Slowbro ate its attacks easily, and Reflect users such as the aforementioned Chansey or even other Snorlax could make its attacks negligent, but these drawbacks were minuscule compared to the sheer power of the sweeping Pokemon. Gen 2 rolled around, and it brought with it some cool new things. Scizor was running around punching whatever it could find, everything was running pretty much the only good item in the game, Leftovers, and Snorlax was having no issues whatsoever, absolutely dominating OU with a new move that GSC brought with it, Curse. The standard Curse-Lax set uses, obviously, Curse, along with Rest for Recovery, Double Edge, Body Slam, or Return, depending on what you want for your normal stab, and the last slot could hold any of Earthquake, letting it get past strong Rock and Steel types, Fire Blast or Flamethrower to get past the infamous Skarmory, as well as Blasting Fortress, Lovely Kiss to immobilize and chip away at Pokemon that would otherwise wall it, and Thunder as an alternative Skarm answer and a nice tool to beat Cloyster switching in. Another potentially threatening Curse set was this Rest Talk set, although it competed with strong coverage moves for the 4th slot. Snorlax didn't have to use Curse to be relevant, though. Snorlax started off quite well, with its belly drums taking even the smallest of opportunities to boost up to maximum attack and sweep the entire team's Skarm and all. It had a few other sets, utilizing things like Toxic Stall or just an all-out attacker, but even without the busted tool of Curse, Snorlax was a force to be reckoned with, and was on pretty much every serious GSC OU team. That's not to say it was without flaws though, however small they may be. While it could run certain moves to get rid of opposing Skarmory, it was still considered the best Snorlax check around, and it didn't hurt that it was an amazing defensive Pokemon all around either. Other phasers, especially normal resistant ones such as T-Tar or Steelix, could get in on Snorlax slacking Earthquake and roar it out to get rid of its boosts. Other Pokemon such as good Physical Walls, Notorious Spikes, Cloyster, and Fortress, Ghost types, and Pokemon running Explosion could take their opportunities to either force Snorlax out or outright KO it. The sheer unpredictability and unmatched strength of Snorlax makes it the Brawl Medlight of competitive singles Pokemon, and has rightfully earned its place at the head of competitive Pokemon's OU pantheon. With Gen 3 having T-Tar as the big new man around, setting up Sand in virtually every match, Snorlax's bulk and therefore its viability fell compared to the incredibly successful generation it previously had. Curse-Lax made a well-earned comeback, just as it could if it was the last Pokemon standing on the team, due to being able to boost up without fear of being phased out. Running the obligatory Curse and Rest, it could boost while staying healthy even in Sand, hit hard with powerful Stab and Return, and run either Shadow Ball to deal with Gengar and its new Levitate, Earthquake for powerful threats such as T-Tar and the strong grounded steels Magneton, Jirachi, and Metagross, and HP Steel or Bug that could be used for good coverage if needed. Its immunity ability giving it a valuable, immunity to Toxic was also useful, but it cannot get stalled out while it's set up late game, and it can also run utility with moves like Earthquake, Focus Punch, Shadow Ball, and of course, Self-Destruct, which could be used on certain teams. Snorlax in Advanced OU wasn't without its flaws, however, due to the aforementioned omnipresence of Sand, as well as a weakness to the spikes often set up by tier staple Skarmory, as well as less used but still respectable mons like Cloyster. Its strong points outweigh this fairly well, though, letting it be a respectable, defining force in Advanced OU and capping off its 3rd heavily successful generation in a row. Quick disclaimer, everything I said about Snorlax being good in Advance is flat out wrong. Sure, it has potential to sweep if it can't be phased due to being the last mon on a team, but the Smogon strategy page greatly oversells Snorlax's potential, according to friends of mine who know the tier better, as well as the viability rankings placing it in the E tier. Snorlax loses far too much from Sand to be considered a worthy addition to a team, Curse can't be used well due to the aforementioned phasers, Spikes adds more injury to injury as well as insult to injury, and one of the best things it can really do is blow up. At that point, you're basically wasting a team slot that could be filled by a better wall or sweeper like Suicune, Zapdos, Celebi, Jirachi, or even Blaziken or Sceptile. So, I guess I get to say the thing. Unfortunately, Snorlax was no good at all in Advanced OU. Gen 4 rolled around, and Snorlax was ready to come swinging right back into OU where it belonged for the 4th generation in a row. However, it had some big obstacles to overcome, and quite a few of them, with countless new offensive Pokemon being added, among them being Lucario, Gliscor, Empoleon, and fellow wall Hippowdon, as well as a Life Orb being introduced to boost their damage even further. Snorlax started to lag behind, ending up in mid-E tier, the lowest it had ever fallen. Another factor contributing to this was pure normal typing, which, far from Gen 1's top placement, leaves a lot to be desired in the way of resistances. Fortunately, however, it still finds a very useful niche because of its role as an offensively geared special tank, letting it switch into special attackers and do what it's always been best at: setting up and sweeping with Curse. The move, combined with an already low speed stat along with great attack and special bulk, lets Snorlax be a very fearsome opponent under the right conditions, and along with its famous Curse and the necessary normal stab, it can carry Earthquake for T-Tar as well as Heatran and other grounded steals, Fire Punch for those it can't hit such as Skarm or Bronzong, and Crunch for the pesky ghost types like Rotom and Gengar that would otherwise be walled by. In the last slot, it can run one of two more classic moves: Rest for recovery and the ability to preserve Snorlax for a sweep later, although this had to be used carefully since it can give opposing setup mons their perfect opportunity, or Self-Destruct to blow opponents back to GSC. Apart from this, it could also run Choice Band Set, which makes up for its poor speed with the ability to basically force out any special attackers and possibly take a KO or two in the process, functioning as a decent wall breaker. Of course, Pokemon like Heracross and the aforementioned Lucario countered it pretty hard with strong fighting type moves, and ghost types would generally mess it up, but Snorlax was still a unique and interesting part of Gen 4 OU. We're not quite done with Gen 4 just yet, though. In 2008, the Pokemon World Championships were introduced as a doubles format held annually to crown a champion, and in 2008, the first Pokemon World Champion was Izuru Yoshimura, using none other than the famous Drumlax. He used it to great effect in the finals, using a set of Belly Drum, Body Slam, Fire Punch, and one other move that I couldn't find, and holding a Citrus Berry, and he managed to snag a KO on Metagross, almost took out Cresselia before going down, and eventually won that game by outlasting his opponent Zapdos with his Bronzong. His team was themed Molf Party, due to his alias Molf, and saw usage in the previous year of VGC as well. All in all, a great showing by Yoshimura, and though he didn't quite make it to the top the following year, Snorlax saw usage due to his legacy, including a first place finish by Kazuyuki Tsuji at Worlds. While 2010 didn't see a whole lot of Snorlax play, the 4th place finisher at Worlds, Wataru Onoshi, used one, keeping the Molf Party going. In Gen 5 though, the power creep was just too much for Snorlax and its former OU staple Zapdos, and it finally took enough hits to drop to UU. Even there, it struggles against black and white surplus of fighting types, and with Gen 5's weird sweep mechanics, its lack of recovery outside of rest and lefties hurts it even more. However, Snorlax can always find some use doing what it's always done best: walling special attackers and setting up with Curse. With everything considered, Snorlax is a great Pokemon, landing in the middle of black and white UU's S tier, and checks a lot of scary offensive and defensive threats alike. While Curse isn't its most prominent moveset, it continues to be a threat by coming in on Pokemon that it beats and setting up to make it both an unstoppable force and an immovable object, provided the Rhyperior wasn't on the field. Its most used moveset was Offensive Lax, using a combination of a normal stab, Pursuit, Earthquake, and either Crunch or Fire Punch, depending on what you needed to counter. It could run either lefties or Choice Band, the latter letting it tear through would-be checks with the right choice move. All in all, while it finally fell from OU, Snorlax still managed to be one of the best Pokemon in black and white UU. Unfortunately, this generation, Snorlax didn't see any top placements at Worlds, and I can't find any records for regionals, so if any of you guys have some way for me to get that info more easily, let me know in the comments. While we're here, Snorlax didn't see any notable usage in VGC at Worlds in Gen 6 either. What Snorlax did see in Gen 6 though, was another great generation in UU. It was, do I even need to say it at this point, a premier special wall with the offense to back it up. The ever-classic Curse-Lax set made yet another appearance, as did the Choice Band one, and Thick Fat boosted its survivability even further as it sat on the field taking hits and setting up to sweep. However, just like in Gen 4, not everything was really coming up Snorlax. Its unboosted defense was pretty low, and combined with its awful speed, that made it pretty vulnerable to the fighting types running around. However, when played right, Snorlax could be an excellent addition to a team and a fearsome threat, earning its place in the B tier of Gen 6 UU. After that pretty short stint, Gen 7 finally arrived, and with it came a whole host of problems for Lax and UU. most of them being due to power creep. Its low defense and speed were still not really great for it, and taunt users prevented it from fixing that by locking Curse, and so Snorlax finally failed on you. There, it brought its Curse-Lock set, along with its other wall-breaking and defensive properties, but it was still very reliant on Curse and some form of recovery, which was exploitable because of its low speed. It also tended to struggle against Ghost types and Fighting types, and Mons with Haze, Taunt, or Unaware stuffing out its setup attempts weren't great. Despite that though, Snorlax still managed to make an impact and was a staple part of Gen 7 RU. While we're here, it's also worth noting that, at least in 2018, Paul Ruiz won Masters at Worlds with a team consisting of Tapu Koko, Salamence, Incineroar, Gastrodon, Kartana, and of course Snorlax, giving it another first place finish. Congrats to Paul Ruiz, and thanks for giving Snorlax some more time in the spotlight. Snorlax was brought back in Sword and Shield, and while it still saw use in RU, it wasn't really a lot. It had some nice upsides, and if you wanted to, building a team specifically around Wax worked pretty well, but it was still very reliant on Curse and Rest. While strong Pokemon could force it out, trap it in a Rest cycle, leaving it unable to set up and sweep, or force it to take damage from entry hazards. However, good support and team building, namely hazard removal and Clerics, could fix a lot of Snorlax's inherent flaws. Unfortunately, it was fairly niche in RU, leading it to falling even further to NU and being reunited with its old friend Tauros. In this tier, it was the same story. Great Special Bolt, capable of sweeping teams when afforded the chance to set up, but its bad on boosting defense still led to it taking a lot of damage, and it was still heavily reliant on Rest. However, Gen 8 NU was a more welcoming environment for Snorlax than its previous two placings had been, letting it find a place as a solid setup sweeper in the low A tier. Snorlax didn't quite make the cut for Scarlet and Violet, but with it being confirmed back in the DLC, I'll be excited to see how Terrestrialization helps Snorlax out. Maybe it can finally rise for the first time since the glory days of GSC. So that's it, Snorlax's first 3 generations and then its subsequent fall from grace. While it may not be viable in OU past Gen 4, it's been either a solid tier threat or nearly as dominant as in Gen 2 in every tier it's managed to make a home in. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like and consider subscribing, because this video was a lot of fun to write and I'd love to see some support on it. Comment down below, what do you think of a competitive Snorlax? What would you give it in Gen 9 to give it back some of its old power? Of course, you can also request other Pokemon for me to cover in case this takes off, which I'd be glad to talk about. Go ahead and follow me on Twitter and join my Discord, both of which are in the description, to hang out and talk about competitive Pokemon. With all that though, this has been a fun video, but it's over now. So until next time, this is Shoot Kapow, over and out.